Have you ever found yourself standing before a truly colossal ancient stone building, perhaps a sturdy medieval castle or a soaring cathedral with walls thicker than a truck, and just wondered about the hidden stories etched into its very foundations?
Or maybe you've stumbled upon a vivid, almost childlike painting from 1,000 years ago,
Mm.
filled with expressive figures, and felt a surprising connection, to a world that seems so incredibly distant.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into the Romanesque period. This is an era that's often been simplistically and perhaps unfairly labeled the Dark Ages.
Right, that label is so misleading.
It really is. But as we're about to unpack, it was actually a time absolutely bursting with innovation, profound faith, and a truly fascinating blend of old traditions meeting new ideas.
Mhm.
Our mission today is to cut through the vast amount of information available and pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, giving you a real shortcut to being truly well-informed about this pivotal, foundational time in Western European history.
And we've got a rich stack of sources guiding us everything from detailed historical accounts to intricate architectural notes that will serve as our expert companions on this journey.
Exactly.
And we won't just tell you what Romanesque was. Our goal is to uncover why it mattered so profoundly, exploring how this era shaped not only monumental structures like grand cathedrals and imposing castles, but also the more intimate details of daily life.
Yeah, like the very clothes people wore, the furniture in their homes, and the art that surrounded them.
Get ready for some genuine aha moments as we reveal the hidden complexities and surprising ingenuity of this period, often overlooked in the shadows of the Roman Empire and the later Gothic flourish.
Right, let's unpack this and set the scene, starting with the very foundations of this new age. After the immense power and eventual decline of the Western Roman Empire around the 5th century, Europe certainly entered a period that's often referred to as the Dark Ages.
That familiar term.
And it sounds rather bleak, conjuring images of intellectual stagnation and chaos. But our sources really emphasize that the Romanesque style didn't just magically appear out of nowhere, fully formed.
Not at all. It grew organically.
Instead, it slowly, patiently, and ingeniously grew up from these very ashes, particularly in those regions that had previously been under Roman rule. Think of it less as a sudden burst and more like a phoenix, painstakingly rebuilt, slowly beginning to rise from the remnants of a fallen giant.
That's a perfect analogy. While the formal Romanesque period is generally considered to begin around the late 10th or early 11th century and last until the rise of Gothic in the 12th, elements that define it were clearly emerging much earlier.
Even in the 9th century.
Yes, even in the 9th century, particularly in places like Italy. The name Romanesque itself was actually coined much later, in the early 19th century, by art historians who saw its clear connection to Roman building techniques, the pervasive use of the round arch, for instance, and a reinterpretation of classical aesthetics, blended with new regional influences. It was a stylistic bridge, not a clean break.
Right, connecting back to Rome. And a pivotal figure who truly began to lift Europe out of this perceived intellectual darkness was the Frankish ruler, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great.
Charlemagne, absolutely central.
His reign from 768 to 814 really brought about a new strain of enlightenment. The term Carolingian, which comes directly from his name, describes the work of this era, and our sources absolutely highlight it as a direct precursor, a real harbinger to Romanesque architecture and art.
Definitely a harbinger.
This raises an important question for us. What exactly did Charlemagne do that was so impactful, so foundational for what came next in Western European culture?
Charlemagne was indeed monumental, and his impact went far beyond mere military might, though he certainly was a formidable conqueror who united vast swaths of Western and Central Europe.
Okay.
But his true genius lay in his understanding that stability and progress weren't just about swords and armies. He was instrumental in reviving a strong, centralized, and efficient government, which brought a much-needed sense of order and stability to a fractured continent.
So infrastructure, basically, governance.
Exactly. And more than that, he actively stimulated a renewed interest in learning. He explicitly ordered every monastery and abbey, under his rule, to establish schools where students could gain an education, essentially kickstarting organized learning again.
Wow. Ordering schools to be set up.
Yes. But perhaps his most crucial, far-reaching achievement, one that directly fed into the preservation of knowledge and culture, was his dedication to the preservation of ancient manuscripts.
This is fascinating.
He commissioned scholars to travel throughout Europe, locating, copying, and correcting classical Latin and Christian texts. This single act was absolutely vital. Imagine, without his intervention, Much of the classical wisdom and early Christian thought could have been lost forever.
It really could have vanished.
He created an intellectual foundation upon which the Romanesque era would build.
That's incredible. A true visionary in the midst of what we sometimes mistakenly label as pure darkness. It sounds like he understood that true power wasn't just military, but intellectual, a foundational shift for the continent.
Precisely.
Did that renewed focus on learning translate into specific art forms or architectural advancements during his own Carolingian period? Or was it a more gradual ripple effect that led to Romanesque?
It was definitely a gradual ripple effect, but with immediate seeds planted. The Carolingian Renaissance saw a remarkable revival in manuscript illumination and metalwork, for instance, often directly copying and reinterpreting classical styles. So the artistry was certainly there.
Okay, so the skills were being honed.
Yes. And in architecture, while they didn't have the full vaulting innovations of later Romanesque, they experimented with grand basilican plans and monumental westworks, which we'll discuss later.
Right, those impressive entrances.
So Charlemagne created the fertile intellectual and political ground, and the Romanesque period became the fruit of that labor, pushing those initial ideas to new structural and artistic heights.
Fascinating. And it wasn't just political leadership that shaped the Romanesque. Geography and climate played a huge, often underestimated role in how the style manifested across Europe.
Oh, absolutely. Massively important.
Our sources really underscore how the geographical position determined many of the peculiarities of the style in each country. For example, climatic conditions led to distinct differences in architectural treatment.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, consider the vastly different needs across the continent. In the duller, cloudier, and often colder climates of the north, like in Germany or England.
You need more light.
Exactly. Window openings in Romanesque buildings were often intentionally enlarged to admit sufficient, precious light. Their architecture needed to gather every bit of available daylight.
Makes sense.
Conversely, in the sunnier, hotter southern regions like Italy or parts of France, windows were kept intentionally small to exclude heat and maintain a cooler interior, often appearing almost like arrow slits.
So, tiny windows in the south.
Pretty much. This practical adaptation had a significant impact on the interior experience, leading to much darker northern naves and cooler, more enclosed southern ones.
I can picture that difference vividly.
And beyond climate, the local availability of geological materials was paramount. Builders used what was at hand. Massive, easily quarried stone in some areas, more abundant brick in others where good stone was scarce.
Like Lombardy, maybe, with brick.
Yes, precisely. Fine marble in Italy for decorative effect, and even terracotta, particularly in regions like Lombardy, for its pliable and decorative qualities.
Right.
This directly shaped the specific building practices, the structural limitations, and the aesthetic nuances from one region to another. It really wasn't a one-size-fits-all style. It was deeply rooted in its local environment, a true reflection of the land itself.
So a style profoundly influenced by its immediate surroundings, politically, geographically, and materially. But perhaps nothing characterized the Romanesque era more profoundly than unified Christianity.
Definitely. The church was everything.
It wasn't just a religion, it was the very bedrock of society, acting as an incredibly powerful, unifying force across the entirety of Europe. In a world fragmented by the collapse of Roman central authority, the church provided the only true, widespread infrastructure.
Precisely. The church was organized hierarchically, from the Pope downwards, through archbishops, bishops, and local priests, forming a vast organized network. Its pervasive influence touched every single aspect of daily life and culture.
Every aspect.
Pretty much. It was often seen as the sole hope, the one stable institution in a world that had been shattered by invasions, political instability, and a lack of central authority.
A constant presence.
This profound spiritual and practical importance led directly to a significant rise in church building and decoration, as the church sought to express its power, provide spiritual guidance, and offer a sense of order and security to its followers.
And within this powerful structure, monasticism played an absolutely critical, almost heroic role. This was a way of life where monks and nuns withdrew partially or entirely from secular society, dedicating themselves to spiritual pursuits within self-sufficient communities.
The monastic orders.
But their role wasn't just spiritual, was it? It extended far beyond prayer.
Not at all. This raises an important question. How did learning and artistic traditions survive, and even flourish, when roads were often destroyed or unsafe, trade was frequently interrupted, and universities as we know them were virtually non-existent?
Right. Where did the knowledge go?
The answer lies largely with these monasteries. They became the crucial centers that kept learning and knowledge alive during what was essentially a prolonged period of European fragmentation.
The keepers of the flame, so to speak.
Exactly. Monks, working diligently in their scriptoria-dedicated writing rooms, meticulously copied and preserved ancient manuscripts, both classical and theological.
All by hand.
All by hand. They weren't just preserving, they were translating, annotating, and illustrating, acting as the custodians of culture, the librarians, and the publishing houses of their age.
That's incredible dedication.
Imagine the quiet dedication required. Copying entire books by hand, often in cold, dimly lit rooms, ensuring that the wisdom of antiquity would not be lost. They were the unsung heroes of intellectual continuity, truly bridging the gap between the classical world and the emerging medieval one.
That's a vital point that often gets overlooked when we think about the Dark Ages. It's a testament to the power of dedication and community.
Absolutely.
And speaking of significant historical events that shaped the era, the Crusades, those series of religious expeditionary wars blessed by the Pope, certainly left an indelible mark on Romanesque society and its art.
Oh, the Crusades. Their impact was multifaceted and profound. Beyond their religious and military objectives, the Crusades provided unprecedented sustained contact with other cultures, particularly those in the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Middle East.
So a lot of cultural exchange, even amidst conflict.
Yes, absolutely. This exposure brought new ideas, artistic motifs, and even technologies back to Western Europe. This cross-cultural exchange stimulated further church decoration, incorporating new elements and a renewed vibrancy.
Interesting.
It also played a significant role in the emergence of ideals like chivalry, the knightly code of honor, loyalty, and prowess, as well as courtly love, and the development of heraldry, which became prominent themes in the art and literature of the period.
Ah, chivalry and heraldry. You see that connection?
These weren't isolated events. They were deeply interwoven with the fabric of Romanesque society and its artistic output, essentially broadening Europe's horizons.
So it's clear the Romanesque period wasn't just about big buildings or religious fervor. It was about a complete, evolving societal structure. Our sources also briefly touch on the socio-political structures that defined the era.
Right, the framework.
We had feudalism, which was the system of obligations where land was held in exchange for service or labor, forming a hierarchical pyramid from kings down to peasants.
The classic feudal pyramid.
And manorialism, which described the economic and social system of the manor, the lord's estate, where peasants worked the land in exchange for protection.
Local economy.
And, of course, the rise of knighthood.
The relationship between kings and knights was crucial to this structure. Knights were typically the young sons of noble families, trained from a young age in warfare and the code of chivalry.
Right, the warrior class.
They served as the military backbone, providing protection in a decentralized world, and their roles shaped the political landscape and their chivalric ideals that emerged during this period. These social structures were the essential framework within which Romanesque art and architecture flourished, largely driven by the power and needs of the church and the feudal lords.
It paints a picture of a very structured, hierarchical world.
Imagine a society where almost every aspect of your life, your livelihood, your safety, your spiritual well-being, was determined by this intricate web of allegiances and beliefs.
Okay, now that we have that foundational understanding of the Romanesque world, let's really dive into Romanesque life itself. Okay, let's unpack this. What did people actually wear during this era?
Fashion. Always interesting.
Our sources reveal that a general feature of Merovingian and Carolingian clothing, which directly influenced early Romanesque fashion, was its surprising similarity for both sexes, often derived from classical Roman styles via Byzantium.
What's fascinating here is how practical and relatively uniform the basic garments were, prioritizing function over elaborate fashion trends as we understand them today.
Makes sense for the time.
For example, both men and women wore the chemise, which was a long, simple undertunic, essentially functioning as an undershirt or shift, usually made of linen.
Like a base layer.
Exactly.
Right.
Over that, everyone wore a main tunic, which was the primary outer garment. Then there was the dalmatic, a more formal outer tunic, often with wider, open sleeves, or sometimes more restrictive closed sleeves, signifying status.
Okay, so tunics were key.
Definitely. For peasants, a simpler, often sleeveless tunic called a colobium was common, practical for physical labor. And of course, various types of cloaks, simple rectangular pieces of fabric pinned at the shoulder, were worn by everyone for warmth and protection against the elements.
A basic necessity.
A basic necessity in a world with little indoor heating. The focus was definitely on functionality, layering, and modesty, with a clear lineage tracing back to Roman and Byzantine styles.
So, a remarkably unisex foundational wardrobe, almost like historical workwear. But what about women's specific garments, particularly as we move into the Carolingian period, where we have a bit more detailed information about how they distinguish themselves?
Right, there were some differences. While information is indeed limited for the earlier Merovingian period, Carolingian times, around the 9th century, offer clearer insights into distinct female attire.
Okay, what did they wear?
Women generally wore the stola, which was a long, loose gown, often pouched at the waist and secured with a leather belt. It frequently featured an insta, which was essentially a narrow, decorative strip or band of fabric.
Like trim.
Sort of, yes, and a decorated band around the neck that continued down the front to the feet, adding a touch of elegance. This band is, incidentally, an ancestor of the liturgical stole used by clergy today.
Oh, interesting connection.
Another key garment was the pela, a versatile, long, cross scarf, often held in place with a pin or a small decorative fibula. It was racked around the shoulders, with one end typically falling in front and the other behind, creating a graceful drape.
Sounds quite elegant, actually.
It could be. Importantly, the pela could also be used to cover the head, reflecting the Byzantine influence and the societal emphasis on modesty.
Head coverings seem to be a significant element, particularly for women, signifying respectability. Our sources mention specific details about hair and headdresses.
Yes, head coverings were very important culturally. It seems the earliest and simplest headdress for women was just a narrow band holding the hair, tied behind the head with the two ends falling down.
Simple enough.
However, under the Carolingians, we see more elaborate styles in illuminated manuscripts, revealing women wearing intricate nets woven with beads or even precious stones, almost like hair jewelry.
Wow, like beaded hairnets.
Pretty much. But for the sake of respectability and as a sign of their marital status or piety, women were consistently expected to cover their heads with veils.
Ah, the veils!
Two common types mentioned are the ricinium, which was a simple, often smaller veil, and the larger, more encompassing maphers, both serving to cover the head and often the shoulders, reflecting a deep societal emphasis on modesty and decorum.
So not just accessories, they were deeply symbolic.
Absolutely. Culturally loaded.
From what people wore, let's shift to where they lived. What was life like inside those imposing Romanesque castles, and what about everyday comforts, or perhaps the lack thereof?
Castles. Right. Our sources trace the evolution of early castles, and it's quite a transformation from humble beginnings.
They weren't always huge stone fortresses.
No, far from it. Early castles were surprisingly simple. They often began as basic houses built on a raised mound, a natural hill, or an artificial mound called a motte, chosen for its easily defensible position.
The motte and bailey structure.
Exactly. That's the origin. Initially, these early strongholds were just surrounded by a simple wooden fence or a wooden palisade. But it wasn't long before wood, being susceptible to fire and decay, was strategically replaced by more durable and resistant stone.
A crucial upgrade.
A crucial evolution in defensive architecture. The main house of the castle, known as the keep or donjon, might stand freely within the defensive wall or be built directly against it, sharing part of its stone structure. These keeps were usually multi-storied, forming a compact, defensible mass designed to be a final refuge.
And some early castles were even simpler, essentially just towers that served as homes.
That's right. Some early castles, often called tower houses, were essentially just tall, fortified towers with rooms stacked vertically inside. They frequently had corner projections or turrets to make defending the walls easier, allowing defenders to shoot down on attackers along the wall base.
Smart design.
As military techniques for attack improved with the development of siege engines like trebuchets, castles had to evolve significantly to counter these threats.
An arms race, architecturally speaking.
Precisely. They started incorporating more sophisticated defensive towers along their walls, elaborate multi-layered gatehouses with portcullises and drawbridges, and multiple concentric wall systems to increase protection, creating formidable, almost impenetrable fortresses. This continuous adaptation to military needs is a truly fascinating aspect of their design.
What's fascinating here is how incredibly practical and multi-purpose castle interiors often were, especially in those early days. The hall was truly the beating heart of the castle.
The Great Hall, yes.
Serving as the primary living, dining, and even sleeping room for the lord, his family, all the servants, and the garrison. What were the early comforts, or frankly the distinct lack thereof, like in these Romanesque halls?
They were quite austere by modern standards. The walls were typically bare, rough stone, though sometimes they might be whitewashed with lime plaster to brighten them slightly.
Just bare stone. Cold.
Very. Floors were either bare stone flags or simple wooden boards, offering little insulation. Ceilings were usually structural wood beams and planks, often left exposed. Windows were tiny slits, primarily for defense and minimal light.
Arrow slits, basically.
And crucially, they usually didn't have glass. Imagine the drafts, the cold, and the general lack of a clear view. This made for a rather stark, often damp, and certainly chilly environment, far from the luxurious images we might conjure from later periods.
I can absolutely imagine. So how did they manage heating and seating in such a cavernous, uninsulated space?
Early on, the hall would have a large open hearth for a fire in its very center. The smoke would simply rise to a smoke hole in the roof, often covered by a louver to keep out rain.
Smoky, very smoky.
But which meant the hall was perpetually smoky. The fireplace and chimney, which allowed smoke to be vented efficiently outside, were actually later innovations that dramatically improved comfort and air quality.
Ah, the chimney. A key invention.
Absolutely. Seating arrangements were also highly practical and reflected the social hierarchy. At one end of the hall, there was a raised portion of the floor called the dais, which was reserved for the lord, his family, and honored guests, distinguishing them from the general populace.
The high table, essentially.
Exactly. In the main body of the hall, trestle tables, essentially long wooden boards set up on temporary supports, served as dining and serving stands. They were genius for practicality, as they could be quickly dismantled and stored to clear the hall for other activities.
Smart space saving.
General seating for everyone else was on simple, backless benches or stools. If there was a chair of the estate, it was an honorary, often high-backed, solidly constructed seat reserved solely for the lord at the head table, symbolizing his authority and immovable presence.
The big boss chair.
You could say that.
So, not exactly plush interiors initially, but our sources mention that things started to change, with elements being introduced to bring warmth and a bit of decoration to these stark spaces.
Yes. Gradually, as resources allowed and craft improved, hangings and tapestries began to appear. These were a practical way to cover the bare, cold stone walls, helping to insulate the space and make it feel less forbidding.
Insulation and decoration in one.
Exactly. Tapestries in particular developed as an intricate art form that provided both portable wall coverings useful if the lord moved between residences and stunning decoration. They could depict historical events, biblical scenes, or even mythological creatures, serving as both art and storytelling.
Portable murals.
Pretty much. Basic lighting came primarily from the main fire itself, supplemented by burning torches placed on stands or in wall brackets, casting flickering shadows and emphasizing the gloom. Candles would have been a luxury.
Torches on the walls. Very medieval movie scene.
It really sets the scene, doesn't it?
Shifting our focus to furniture specifically, what were the typical pieces, materials, and stylistic features of Romanesque furniture? I imagine durability was key.
Absolutely. Durability was paramount. Wood was overwhelmingly the chief material for furniture construction. It was readily available, relatively easy to work, and could bear significant weight.
Makes sense. Strong and available.
Ivory was sometimes used for more delicate ornamentation, perhaps as inlays or small carved details on more precious pieces. Metalwork, interestingly, was primarily reserved for the utensils and items used in church rituals, highlighting the church's role as the primary patron of skilled artisans.
So metal for the church, wood for the home, mostly.
Generally speaking, yes. Stylistically, Romanesque furniture is characterized by its solidity and a noticeable echo of the architecture itself, using strong arches and curves, often incorporating paint and decorative hues to brighten its appearance, and featuring simple, robust geometric arrangements.
Arches even in the furniture.
Yes. Our sources mention simplified, almost schematic interpretations of Greco-Roman ornament being used, as seen in 12th century French sculpture representations, showing a continuous thread from classical antiquity.
So we're talking about very solid, functional pieces, often with a structural aesthetic rather than a purely decorative one. What were some of the most common furniture types you'd find in a Romanesque home or castle?
Chests were ubiquitous, serving multiple functions: storage, seating, and even as rudimentary tables.
The ultimate multitasker.
Totally. They appeared in two main types. The dome type, which had a rounded lid-like top and often looked like a hollowed-out log, representing an earlier, more primitive construction. And the boarded type, also known as a six-plank chest, which was more refined, using flat planks joined together, foreshadowing more sophisticated joinery.
Get more complex.
For seating, the Austria-Romanesque folding chair, or cathedra, was an X-shaped stool. Despite its seemingly simple form, this type of chair often implied a certain authority, much like a bishop's cathedra in a church, and its portability was highly valued.
The folding stool of power.
Something like that. And, as mentioned, the chair of the estate was a high-backed, usually immobile and impressively sturdy chair, reserved specifically for the lord and master at the head of the dais, unequivocally symbolizing his authority and status within the household.
No mistaking who's in charge.
None at all. The trestle table was highly practical, as we discussed for the hall, designed to be easily dismantled and stored to save valuable space when not in use.
Still a great idea today, really.
It is.
And beds. What was a typical Romanesque bed like, beyond just a pile of straw on the floor?
Right, moving beyond straw. A typical 13th century bed, representing the later Romanesque period, featured characteristic turned posts and spindles, often with large through tenons visibly projecting from the frame, proudly showcasing the strength of their construction.
Exposed joinery. Interesting.
Our sources highlight a specific example, the Stanley bed, focusing on its incredibly detailed headboard. This headboard features 12 intricately carved panels, alternating between two distinct designs. One, a lively grapevine and leaf scroll, and the other a pointed quatrefoil tracery with rosettes.
Wow, quite ornate for a bed.
Very. Our sources note that this tracery is similar to French or Beauvois tracery of the same period, which means an open, intertwined, almost knot-like pattern, often circular or pointed, creating a delicate, lace-like effect in stone or wood.
So real artistry, even in furniture.
This level of intricate detail on something as personal as a bed headboard truly shows the artistry and increasing refinement of the period, even in private spaces.
That's a wonderful example of detailed craftsmanship. And what about church furniture, which you mentioned earlier, often utilized specialized metalwork? How did it differ from domestic pieces?
Church furniture was indeed often much more ornate than domestic pieces, reflecting the sacred nature of its purpose. Our sources tell us that these items, altars, pulpits, reliquaries, and choir stalls, were frequently brightly painted.
Brightly painted. Why?
Specifically to lighten up the often gloomy stone interiors of the churches, providing a vibrant contrast to the somber architecture, making the holy space pop.
Ah, makes sense. Strategic use of color.
Carvings on church furniture frequently featured simple, stylized animal and plant forms, often symbolic or even abstract geometric patterns, reflecting Christian symbolism and the popular bestiaries of the time.
Symbolic beasts and plants.
And speaking of color, the characteristic colors used during this period, according to our sources, were bone black, ivory white, and rich gold. These vibrant pigments, often derived from natural sources and applied with great skill, would have provided a striking, almost jewel-like contrast to the often somber stone architecture, making the sacred spaces feel awe-inspiring and heavenly.
Black, white, and gold, a powerful combination. That's a great transition because now we move from the practicalities and comforts of daily life to the incredible artistic expression of the Romanesque era.
The art, yes. So much to cover.
After the barbarian invasions and the subsequent decline of centralized Roman authority, as we discussed, roads were often destroyed or unsafe, trade was interrupted, and there were no universities or amenities in the modern sense. So, how did art survive and even revive in this environment? It seems like a miracle.
What's fascinating here, and truly vital to understanding the period, is that the monasteries once again emerge as crucial centers. It was within their fortified walls that learning and artistic traditions were diligently kept alive.
Back to the monasteries.
Always back to the monasteries. With the church seen as the sole hope for stability and salvation in this fractured world, there was a natural and powerful rise in church building and decoration. This drive was also significantly influenced by the Crusades.
Right, the Crusades again.
Which, despite their violent nature, provided sustained contact with other cultures, bringing new ideas, artistic motifs, and even technologies back to Western Europe. For instance, more sophisticated metalworking techniques or textile patterns could be observed.
So new techniques came back too.
We also see the emergence of new cultural values like chivalry, courtly love, and heraldry, which began to permeate society and consequently found their way into artistic themes, adding new narratives beyond purely biblical ones.
Adding secular themes to the mix.
Virtually, yes.
So the church wasn't just a patron, it was practically the only significant patron for art at this time, funneling resources and talent into religious expression. What forms did Romanesque art take beyond the architectural sculpture we'll discuss later? Let's start with frescoes.
Frescoes, or wall paintings, were extensively practiced, particularly in the earlier Carolingian period, and continued into the Romanesque. These large-scale paintings were typically applied directly onto wet plaster walls inside churches and monasteries.
Painting on wet plaster. Tricky.
Very. The technique required artists to work quickly before the plaster dried. Their purpose was primarily didactic, to convey religious narratives to a largely illiterate populace, serving as vibrant visual sermons.
Storybooks on the walls.
Exactly. Imagine walking into a dim church, and suddenly these brightly painted scenes from the Bible or the lives of saints burst forth from the walls, telling stories that few could read but everyone could understand. They were essential teaching tools.
Powerful stuff. And then there are reliquaries. This raises an important question. What was their purpose, and why were they so incredibly elaborate, almost like miniature architectural structures themselves?
Reliquaries were, quite literally, exquisitely crafted containers designed to store and display holy relics, fragments of saints' bones, pieces of the true cross, or objects associated with biblical figures.
Holding sacred objects.
The fervent belief was that relics themselves were not just valuable, but possessed immense spiritual power, believed to perform miracles and offer divine intercession. Our sources quote contemporary belief that relics were more valuable than precious stones and more to be esteemed than gold.
More valuable than gold.
Wow. Given this immense spiritual value, it was considered only appropriate that these sacred objects be enshrined in the most elaborate and precious forms possible, often crafted with gold, silver, enamel, and jewels.
Only the best for the relics.
A prime example is the Chasse of Champagne, a small house-shaped reliquary made of gilt copper, enamel, and gems. Its form often echoed the architecture of the church itself, making the relic a micro-representation of the sacred space, connecting the divine within to the building around it. They were truly objects of veneration and immense wealth.
Little treasure boxes of faith. Here's where it gets really interesting. Illuminated manuscripts. Most of us probably associate these with medieval times, but what exactly is manuscript illumination, and how did it flourish during the Romanesque period, especially with the monasteries playing such a critical role?
Manuscript illumination is the exquisite art of embellishing and illustrating medieval manuscripts. Before the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, every single book had to be painstakingly copied by hand.
As we discussed, by the monks.
A task primarily undertaken by monks and scribes within monasteries. These monks didn't just copy the text, they were artists, often decorating the pages with delicate, intricate miniature paintings, using vibrant pigments, silver, and often shimmering gold leaf.
Gold leaf. Amazing detail.
This was a painstaking and highly skilled art form, requiring immense patience and precision. Our sources give an excellent example. An early 12th century illuminated manuscript illustration depicting Moses expounding the law from the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds.
Okay, what does it show?
This particular piece is divided into two distinct scenes. The upper panel shows Moses and Aaron delivering the law to the Israelites, full of authority and divine presence, while the lower panel shows Moses distinguishing between clean and unclean beasts, a practical application of the law.
So it's illustrating the text directly.
Precisely. This illustration, serving as a frontispiece for a Bible, acted as both a stunning artistic masterpiece and a functional visual aid, making the sacred text more engaging and understandable to a broader audience, even those who might struggle with the written word.
So not just beautiful art, but also a crucial way to make sacred texts more accessible and engaging. And speaking of visual storytelling, we absolutely can't talk about Romanesque art without mentioning one of the most famous textiles in the world, the Bayeux Tapestry.
The Bayeux Tapestry. Iconic.
This raises an important question that speaks to the very heart of the era. How did people learn history and important narratives before widespread literacy?
The Bayeux Tapestry, created between 1073 and 1083, is a truly unique embroidered narrative, a visual chronicle of one of the most pivotal moments in English history, the Norman conquest of England and the events leading up to it.
The whole story stitched out.
It's crucial to clarify that it's actually embroidered wool on linen. Not a true tapestry in the woven sense, but an incredible feat of needlework. Its continuous frieze, stretching almost 70 meters long with its Latin inscriptions and incredibly detailed visual storytelling, served as a powerful literature for the illiterate.
A comic book for the 11th century.
You could almost see it that way. Imagine this. An entire population, vast majority of whom couldn't read, could walk along this masterpiece and understand the complex sequence of historical events, battles, and key figures.
Just by looking. Incredible.
What's fascinating here is its concern not just for historical fact, but for religious emotions and psychological reality, You see omens, dreams, and the inner states of characters depicted, offering a unique window into the mindset and beliefs of the time.
So it's got layers. It's an incredible example of how art conveyed knowledge, propaganda, and shared cultural narratives to a broad public.
Absolutely. History, belief, art, all rolled into one.
That's a perfect illustration of art's practical and propagandistic role. Now let's turn our attention to Romanesque sculpture. Our sources point to a significant revival of monumental artwork, particularly large-scale stone and bronze sculpture.
Yeah, sculpture comes back big time.
Which had largely died out in Western Europe after the fall of Rome, surviving mainly in smaller, decorative forms.
Indeed, while some life-size stucco or plaster work existed in the interim, the tradition of robust, large-scale stone and bronze sculpture truly saw a powerful revival during the Romanesque period. Favorite themes were almost exclusively religious.
Like the Last Judgment.
Exactly. The Last Judgment was particularly prominent. This terrifying and awe-inspiring theme was frequently placed at church entrances, specifically on the tympanum above the main door, serving as a powerful visual sermon to instruct the faithful on the consequences of their actions and inspire awe as they entered holy ground.
A warning before you go in.
Pretty much. Figures were often highly stylized, not aiming for classical realism, but for symbolic power, appearing elongated or distorted to fit architectural elements like columns and door frames.
Form follows function, or architecture.
In a way, yes.
And sculpture was really integral to the architecture itself, wasn't it? Our sources mention the Westwork, for instance, as a place where sculpture thrived.
Absolutely. The Westwork was the monumental western entrance of a church, featuring a tall, imposing facade, often flanked by towers. Sculpture was a fundamental and inseparable part of these grand structures, literally carved into the fabric of the building.
Carved right into the stone.
What's fascinating here is how the capitals of columns inside churches and cloisters became excellent places for carvings. These Romanesque capitals often present a curious mixture of skilled craftwork and quaint storytelling, incorporating both decorative elements like complex knotwork and narrative elements depicting biblical scenes, allegories, or even local legends.
Stories in the column tops.
Creating a rich visual tapestry for those processing through the space.
So the sculpture wasn't just standalone pieces, it was part of the building's very identity and message. And our sources mention specific types of architectural sculpture like the trumeau and tympanum, which sound highly specialized.
They were indeed key locations. A trumeau is the central support post in a large church doorway, often elaborately carved, with a single commanding figure, such as Christ or a powerful saint, serving as a spiritual guardian at the threshold.
The figure in the middle of the door.
Exactly. The tympanum is the large semicircular area or lunette, located directly above the door framed by the arch. This was the prime canvas for the most monumental and impactful sculptural programs.
The main stage for sculpture.
As mentioned, the Last Judgment was a popular theme here, visually reinforcing the church's spiritual authority. Our sources describe a profusion of sculptural ornamentation, often geometric, such as repetitive chevrons, nailheads, and billets, small cylindrical blocks, particularly on moldings around doorways and arches.
Geometric patterns, too.
Yes. 19th century writers, accustomed to classical realism, sometimes dismissively referred to this as barbaric ornament, but it was the distinct and pervasive decorative form, creating rhythmic, textural pattern.
A different aesthetic standard.
Stylized foliage also frequently appears, sometimes deeply carved like the acanthus leaves found on Roman Corinthian capitals, or in shallow relief with spiral patterns, often imitating the intricate designs found in illuminated manuscripts, showing that cross-pollination of artistic ideas.
Everything influenced everything else.
Pretty much, yeah.
And now for the grand finale, let's get into the stone itself. Romanesque architecture. Our sources define it as a powerful combination of features from both Western Roman and Byzantine buildings, forged into something entirely new.
A real fusion.
What are its key identifying characteristics that make it stand out?
Romanesque architecture is immediately recognizable by its inherent massive quality. These structures feel incredibly solid, almost like spiritual fortresses.
The thick walls, right.
Incredibly thick walls, which were necessary to support the immense weight of their roofs. They famously used the round arch, a direct inheritance from Roman building traditions, which you'll see everywhere from doorways to window openings.
The round arch is the signature.
It really is. And to support these arches and vaults, they extensively used sturdy piers, solid masonry supports, often square or rectangular in section, rather than just slender columns, for added strength and stability.
Piers, not just columns.
These elements combine to create structures that feel incredibly imposing, grounded, and durable, a stark contrast to the perceived fragility of the preceding era.
Built to last. And what our sources call the greatest innovation of this period was a monumental leap forward. The translation of the often wooden roofs of earlier basilicas into stone, brick, and cement rib vaults.
Ah, the stone vaults. Game-changing.
This must have been a huge shift in both engineering and aesthetic terms.
It was indeed a crucial aha moment in architectural history, perhaps the single most important innovation of the period. Early Christian basilicas typically had wooden roofs, which were highly susceptible to catastrophic fires.
A huge fire risk.
A major concern in an age before modern fire suppression. The innovation of translating these wooden roofs into heavy, fire-resistant stone, brick, and cement rib vaults was a monumental leap.
Solved the fire problem.
Primarily, yes. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice or about achieving greater height. It was primarily aimed at preventing fires and allowing for the construction of much larger, more impressive structures that could truly embody the church's growing power and wealth. It required incredible engineering prowess to manage the immense weight and outward thrust of these stone ceilings, laying the functional groundwork for all future monumental architecture.
Incredible engineering. And how did the massive pilgrimage routes, like the Camino de Santiago, influence this architectural development and the design of these churches?
The pilgrimage routes were absolutely transformative for church design. Churches located along these heavily trafficked routes experienced a massive, constant influx of pilgrims, often thousands a day.
Thousands a day.
Who needed to access relics and sacred spaces without disrupting the main liturgical services. This necessitated enlarged structures with specific design features, a wider, longer nave, and crucially, the development of the ambulatory.
The walkway around the back.
Exactly. A walkway around the apse at the east end of the church, from which pilgrims could access radiating chapels. These small chapels, branching off the ambulatory, were specifically designed to accommodate and display relics, allowing large numbers of visitors to circulate and venerate relics without interfering with the ongoing Mass at the main altar.
So, practical crowd control built in.
This practical need drove a distinctive church plan.
Our sources also mention some common characteristics regarding light and space within these Romanesque churches. They sound quite dim.
They often were, yes. A common characteristic of Romanesque churches was often insufficient clerestory light. The clerestory is the upper level of the nave wall, pierced by windows.
The windows way up high.
In Romanesque churches, the massive thickness of the walls necessary to support the heavy stone vaults meant that windows often had to be small and deep set, severely limiting the amount of light that could enter the central nave. This contributed to the often somber interior atmosphere.
Thick walls equal small windows.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Another common feature, often located above the side aisles and below the clerestory, was the Gallery of the Women, now typically referred to as the Triforium Gallery. This was an upper-level walkway, or arcade, which provided additional structural support for the nave vaulting and could sometimes be used for overflow seating or as a processional path.
The Triforium, got it. And structurally, Romanesque architecture is often divided into two periods, marking a progression in technique.
Exactly. We have the first Romanesque, which generally refers to the earlier phase, characterized by the use of rubble walls, rough, undressed stones, smaller, simpler windows, and often unvaulted wooden roofs, representing a more rudimentary stage.
Rougher and simpler early on.
Then came the more refined Romanesque style, which saw an increased and masterful use of vaults, particularly stone, and finely dressed stone masonry, indicating a greater technical mastery of building techniques and a more polished monumental aesthetic.
Getting more sophisticated.
This transition truly showcases the ingenuity of Romanesque builders as they tackled increasingly ambitious structural challenges.
Let's dive deeper into these core architectural elements and their functions, starting with the innovative vaulting systems. What were the different types, and how did they evolve from simplest to most complex?
Okay, vaults. We begin with the barrel vault, which is the simplest type, essentially a single, continuous arched surface extending along the length of the space. For example, the nave of a church. Imagine a tunnel. That's a barrel vault.
Like a stone tunnel roof.
Its main drawback was that it exerted continuous outward thrust along its entire length, requiring support from incredibly massive, unbroken walls, which severely limited window placement and thus natural light.
Heavy and needs thick walls.
Yes, a groin vault is almost always square in plan and represents a significant step forward. It's constructed of two barrel vaults intersecting at right angles. The lines where the two barrel vaults meet are called groins.
Where they cross.
These groins are frequently separated by transverse arched ribs, often of a low profile, which are typically square in section and strongly defined. This system allowed for more complex spatial arrangements, creating distinct bays within a nave, and could distribute the weight more effectively to the corners, allowing for some larger openings in the walls compared to a pure barrel vault.
Better weight distribution. Good.
What's truly fascinating here, and a critical development towards later architecture, is the ribbed vault. This sounds like a structural game changer, allowing for much greater architectural freedom.
The ribs are key, right?
It truly was a monumental leap. In ribbed vaults, not only are the ribs spanning the vaulted area transversely, but each vaulted bay also features diagonal ribs, forming an X shape across the ceiling. Crucially, in a ribbed vault, the ribs themselves are the structural members.
It's a skeleton, basically.
Exactly. This meant that the spaces between them, the panels or webs, could be filled with lighter, non-structural material, like thin stone or brickwork. This innovation made the vaults more efficient, significantly lighter, and allowed for greater heights and spans, as the thrust was channeled more effectively down the ribs to specific points of support.
Lighter and stronger.
An excellent example of this innovative technique is clearly seen in the nave of Lisbon Cathedral, where the ribs beautifully articulate the vaulting structure.
And a later Romanesque innovation, hinting at the Gothic era, was the pointed arched vault.
That's absolutely right. Late in the Romanesque period, as builders sought even greater flexibility and height, another solution for regulating the height of diagonal and transverse ribs emerged: the use of arches of the same diameter for both horizontal and transverse ribs.
Same diameter arches, how did that help?
This subtle change caused the transverse ribs to rise higher, leading to the pointed arched vault. This innovation allowed for much greater flexibility in vaulting rectangular bays of different dimensions and, crucially, would become a defining characteristic and enable the soaring heights of the subsequent Gothic style.
The pointed arch arrives.
You can see this early development at churches like Saint-Georges-de-Beaucheville in France.
Moving on to arches and openings, our sources reiterate that arches in Romanesque architecture are consistently semicircular. That's a core identifying feature.
That's the defining characteristic, yes. The pervasive use of the semicircular arch is a direct link to Roman engineering. While very small windows, especially in earlier, less refined structures, might use a solid stone lintel, a flat stone beam for support.
Just a flat top.
Larger windows are almost always topped by a semicircular arch. Similarly, doorways, particularly the grand main entrances of churches, are typically surmounted by a semicircular arch.
Round arches everywhere.
Often, the door itself is set into a much larger arched recess, which is then surmounted by a semicircular area known as a lunette, or tympanum, which, as we discussed, was frequently ornamented with sculpture, turning the entrance into a powerful visual statement.
Right, the tympanum sculpture space.
And to support those massive walls and heavy vaults, they needed buttresses. How do Romanesque buttresses compare to the more famous flying buttresses of the later Gothic period?
Yeah, are they the same?
Buttresses are essentially solid structures, usually made of brick or stone, built against a wall specifically for external support, counteracting the outward thrust of the vaults. It's important to note that while present and crucial, because of the inherent massive nature and sheer thickness of Romanesque walls.
Because the walls were so thick anyway.
Exactly. Their buttresses are not as visually significant or projecting as they become in later Gothic architecture. In Romanesque buildings, the walls themselves were often so thick and heavy that they absorbed much of the thrust, so the buttresses were more like solid, vertical reinforcements, often integrated into the wall mass, rather than the more slender, graceful flying forms you see in Gothic cathedrals.
So less dramatic than Gothic ones.
Definitely less dramatic, more solid.
Towers were a very important, almost defining feature of Romanesque churches, often very prominent and varied.
They certainly were. Towers were a significant and impressive characteristic of Romanesque churches, adding immensely to their monumental quality and often serving multiple practical functions beyond just being bell towers.
More than just bells.
They varied considerably in form and placement, appearing as both tall square structures often flanking the west facade and impressive circular structures, particularly in Italy and Germany. They acted as powerful vertical accents, making the churches visible from a great distance and symbolizing the power of God and the church.
Landmarks, beacons.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to decoration, our sources highlight arcading as the single most significant decorative feature in Romanesque architecture, appearing almost everywhere.
Arcading is pervasive and truly a signature element. It appears in a variety of forms, adding visual rhythm and texture. One common form is the Lombard band, a row of small, often shallow blind arches that visually support a roofline, particularly common in Italian Romanesque.
Little arches under the roof.
Then there's blind arcading, where arches are carved directly into a wall surface but have no actual openings behind them. This is a distinct form of decoration specifically aimed at relieving otherwise blank walls, creating visual interest, shadow, and depth without compromising the wall's structural integrity or allowing light in.
Decoration that doesn't make a hole. Smart.
It's a key Romanesque decorative motif, showing how builders use simple geometric forms to create sophisticated visual effects.
What about the piers that supported these arches, distinguishing them from simple columns?
In Romanesque architecture, piers, massive masonry supports, often square or rectangular in section, were frequently employed to support arches, especially in naves. Unlike slender classical columns, piers offered much greater stability for the heavy Romanesque vaults.
Bigger and stronger than columns.
Yeah, they generally had a horizontal molding representing a capital at the springing of the arch, but often they also featured vertical shafts attached to their faces, which would rise up to meet the springing points of the transverse or diagonal ribs of the vaults above.
Shafts going up to meet the ribs.
This not only added to their structural presence, but also provided a clear visual articulation of the vaulting system, guiding the eye upwards.
And we mentioned westwork earlier in the context of sculpture, but it's also a significant architectural feature, particularly in Germany. Can you expand on its function?
Absolutely. The westwork was a truly monumental Western facade, often decorated with flanking towers, becoming a dominant feature, especially in German Carolingian and early Romanesque churches. It effectively replaced the traditional narthex, or simple entrance porch in many cases.
A whole building at the entrance?
Serving as a grand, imposing entrance that was almost a building within itself. These westworks often contained multiple levels, including chapels, galleries for emperors or dignitaries, and sometimes even living quarters, showcasing the church's immense power, wealth, and its intertwined relationship with secular authority.
Church and state power combined.
They were designed to impress and to process large numbers of people through a ceremonial entryway.
Now let's take a grand tour and see some of these iconic Romanesque structures around Europe, diving deeper into specific examples that really embody these principles. We'll start in France, a hub of innovation and pilgrimage paths.
France is crucial, yes.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Abbey Church of Cluny III was absolutely monumental, a true statement of power.
Cluny III was an astonishing achievement, a testament to the immense power and wealth of the monastic order of Cluny, which held sway over hundreds of daughter monasteries across Europe.
Hugely influential order.
Until the new St. Peter's Basilica was built in Rome nearly 400 years later, Cluny III was the largest church in Western Christianity, with a staggering total length of 187 meters. That's almost 2 football fields long.
2 football fields. Incredible scale.
Its design was a stunning combination of a basilica with 2 transepts, creating a complex cruciform plan and a centralized sanctuary. Its sheer scale alone speaks volumes about the ambition of the era and the church's aspiration to create spaces worthy of divine presence and capable of accommodating thousands of monks and pilgrims. It represented monasticism at its zenith.
Maximum monastic power. Another crucial pilgrimage station and a powerful example of French Romanesque was the Church of St. Foy in Conques, built between 1050 and 1120. It's not just a church, it's a stopping point on a spiritual journey.
Indeed. The Church of St. Foy was a key stop on one of the great pilgrimage routes leading to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, designed specifically to handle a massive influx of travelers.
Built for crowds.
It housed the highly venerated relic of a martyred saint, St. Foy, enshrined in a stunning, gilded, jeweled statue, which attracted hordes of worshippers. Its interior featured a high, narrow nave, roofed with a resonant stone barrel vault, flanked by 2 level aisles.
2 levels of aisles.
Crucially, these aisles were covered with half-barrel vaults, meaning there was no clerestory level to the nave, the main central space. This resulted in a darker nave but surprisingly brighter aisles, as light could enter through windows in the outer walls of the aisles.
Dark nave, bright aisles. Interesting effect.
An octagonal domed tower rose majestically above the crossing, marking it as a significant landmark. Our sources note its simple, austere interior, designed in part to contrast with the rich treasure, the reliquaries, and other precious objects that would have been displayed, creating a powerful spiritual effect.
Simple space, amazing treasure.
Then there's the Bayeux home, or S. Etienne, in Caen, built between 1060 and 1081. This was constructed by William the Conqueror himself to commemorate his invasion of England, a true power statement.
William the Conqueror's church.
This church is absolutely crucial because it represents a monumental step towards the Gothic cathedral type, even within the Romanesque framework. Built by William to celebrate his successful invasion of England, it has a cruciform plan with a very long, groin-vaulted nave, transepts, and a deep chancel.
Well, big and complex.
It also features two-level aisles, an upper level above the aisles called a triforium, and a clerestory level above that at the height of the main vaulting, creating that classic three-story elevation.
The three levels we see later.
But here's the game changer. Its square vaults are ingeniously divided by a cross arch into 6 triangular panels, making them sexpartite vaults. Think of it like a new structural puzzle piece that not only made the ceiling stronger and more stable, but also allowed for much greater height and interior light.
Sexpartite vaults. That sounds important.
This innovative vaulting scheme brings it very close to the design that would become typical for the soaring Gothic cathedrals that followed, illustrating the incredible progressive innovations happening within the Romanesque period itself.
Bridging Romanesque and Gothic. Moving across the continent, Germany also has some truly monumental Romanesque structures, characterized by their grand scale and the impressive westwork, which we discussed as a defining feature. Let's start with the Imperial Cathedral of Speyer.
Speyer. Begun in 1020, the Imperial Cathedral of Speyer in the German Rhineland was originally timber-roofed, but later vaulted in stone, a monumental undertaking. However, its immense length of 132 meters already surpassed Old St. Peter's in Rome.
Bigger than St. Peter's, then.
Indicating a clear ambition for monumental scale and imperial grandeur from the outset. It was a clear statement of the Holy Roman Emperor's power and his connection to the Church. It became the burial place for many Holy Roman Emperors, further cementing its significance.
Imperial Burial Church. Very significant.
And the Church of S. Michael in Corvey-on-the-Weser, built between 873 and 885, introduced that significant German feature we discussed, the westwork.
Early example of the westwork.
Yes. S. Michael at Corvey is a prime example of a basilican church with an aisled nave. To its eastward-facing main body, a massive unit, almost a complete building in itself, was added at the western end. This element, known as a westwork, became a frequent and defining part of German Carolingian and early Romanesque churches.
That big western block.
It often contained an imperial lodge or gallery, allowing the emperor to observe services from a prominent position, underscoring the intertwining of secular and religious power. It created an imposing and distinctive western facade, a true architectural signature of German Romanesque.
S. Michael in Hildesheim is another German example that takes a unique approach to layout.
S. Michael in Hildesheim further exemplifies the German approach to monumental scale and internal complexity. Its plan is notable for having transepts topped by towers at each end, creating a distinctive double-ended appearance.
Towers at both ends. Unusual.
The aisles on either side of the nave are almost double its width, creating a very broad and expansive interior space, quite different from the narrow naves found elsewhere. While it initially had a smaller eastern apse, this was later outmatched by a large vaulted western chancel, showing a shift in emphasis to the western end of the church, another characteristic German feature.
Focus on the west end.
It features a unique alternating support system of piers and columns, creating a powerful visual rhythm down the nave.
Now, let's journey south to Italy, where Romanesque styles often have a distinct regional flavor, blending local traditions with Roman and Byzantine influences, and of course home to a certain famous leaning wonder.
Italy.
And Pisa.
The Cathedral Group at Pisa, built between 1053 and 1272, is a perfect example of the Romanesque style's grace.
Indeed. This iconic group includes the Campanile, universally known as the Leaning Tower, the majestic cathedral itself, and the impressive circular baptistry. What's characteristic of the Pisan Romanesque style, as seen here, are the distinctive tiers of open colonnades.
Those rows of columns supporting arches that wrap around all three buildings. This creates an incredibly light, elegant, and decorative effect, distinguishing it from the heavier, more fortress-like Romanesque in the north.
Much lighter looking.
What's fascinating here is that the Campanile began leaning during construction quite early on due to the settling of its soft clay foundation. Despite this structural challenge, the entire complex, built largely of gleaming white marble, exudes an elegant proportionality and a distinctly Italian, almost classical grace. It truly embodies a civic pride in its design.
Amazing it's still standing. And another Italian example is Esminiato in Florence, built between 1018 and 1062, which shows a different approach, particularly with its striking interior.
Esminiato is notable for its wooden roof, contrasting with the stone vaults we've discussed as a Romanesque innovation. However, its interior is elaborately decorated with striking black and white marble and geometric patterns,
That black and white marble look.
creating a visually rich and distinctly Tuscan space. This contrasting black and white marble on the walls and pavements adds to its unique aesthetic and reflects a long-standing local tradition. The chancel is raised significantly, allowing for a crypt level beneath it, which opens up a view into a lower crypt level.
Raised chancel, lower crypt. Complex levels.
Its nave is divided into 3 wood-roofed sections, with crypts at each end and a choir rising above eye level, creating a complex internal topography that guides the eye.
Crossing the Channel, the Romanesque way of building was famously brought to England by the Norman invaders of 1066. In England, the term Norman is actually used to denote what would be called Romanesque elsewhere in Europe.
Right, Norman is the English term for it.
And Durham Cathedral is widely described as the greatest Norman structure, a true masterpiece.
Durham Cathedral is indeed magnificent and a structural marvel. Its construction began in 1093, making it one of the earliest examples of truly monumental Romanesque architecture in England. Its massive arcade columns, dating from the late 11th century, are particularly striking.
Those huge carved columns.
At Durham, alternate columns are simple cylindrical forms, but they carry incredibly powerful carved, abstract, geometric patterning zigzags, fluting, and spirals, creating a dynamic and powerful rhythm down the nave, a visual and tactile experience of immense scale and decorative power.
So much texture and pattern.
Crucially, Durham is also one of the first churches in Europe to employ a systematic ribbed vaulting system over its entire nave, long before Gothic architecture emerged. This innovation was revolutionary,
Early ribbed vaults.
allowing for lighter, higher vaults and directly influencing the development of later Gothic cathedrals. It's a key aha moment for understanding the transition between styles.
A real game changer right there in Durham. And beyond cathedrals, the Normans also built significant fortifications, like the iconic Tower of London.
The Tower of London is a direct and imposing result of the Norman conquest and their need for fortified centers of power to control their newly acquired territory. Identified as the royal palace and fortress built on the Thames, its central structure, the White Tower, began construction shortly after 1066.
Right after the conquest.
It's a classic Romanesque keep, a formidable square structure with thick walls, small windows, and defensive turrets, symbolizing Norman authority and military might. It stands as a powerful testament to the defensive aspect of Romanesque-era construction and the strategic importance of such strongholds.
A symbol of power on the Thames. Finally, let's look at Scandinavia, where the Romanesque style, often thought of as stone-based, adapted to different materials, leading to some truly unique wooden marvels.
The stave churches. Amazing structures.
This raises an important question for us. How did the Romanesque style, with its inherent massiveness and stone focus, adapt so successfully to completely different building materials like timber?
The stave churches in Norway and similar wooden churches found in parts of Denmark, Sweden, and Finland are remarkable examples of this adaptation. The Norwegian stave churches in particular are named for their staves, which are the massive load-bearing wooden poles, virtually whole tree trunks that form their main structural features.
Like huge wooden columns.
Almost like internal columns. The central body of these churches is a tall space, formed by these vertical timbers, which powerfully suggest the masts of ships, creating an incredibly vertical soaring effect. Around this central space, there's a lower aisle with an outside wall of wide, intricately carved boards.
Wow, like a wooden ship inside.
This ingeniously creates a small, wooden version of the typical nave and aisle Romanesque church type, demonstrating an incredible adaptation to abundant local timber resources.
So they essentially reproduced stone architecture in wood, complete with arches and ornamentation.
Exactly. The semicircular arches, characteristic of stone Romanesque arcades, are faithfully reproduced in wood, and carved details, often intricate, interlaced patterns, dragon heads, or Christian symbols, echo comparable work in stone, showing a stylistic transfer across materials.
Translating the style into wood carving.
The church at Torpo, dating to about 1190, is particularly remarkable for its colorful interior paintings that line an arched partial ceiling. This wasn't just decorative. It directly suggests an intention to simulate a stone barrel vault, complete with painted figures acting out events of religious legends in a style strikingly similar to medieval manuscript illumination.
Painting a vault onto the wood. Clever.
It's a wonderful example of how the Romanesque aesthetic transcended specific materials, demonstrating incredible ingenuity and adaptability to local resources and cultural traditions. It truly proves that the Romanesque was not just about stone. It was about a powerful set of architectural and artistic ideas that could be expressed through diverse means.
That's fantastic. So what does this all mean for you, the well-informed learner? We've journeyed through the Romanesque period, seeing how a time often simplistically labeled dark was, in fact, incredibly vibrant, foundational, and profoundly innovative for Western Europe.
Absolutely, so much more than just dark.
We've unpacked how deep faith, complex socio-political structures like feudalism, the practicalities of geography and climate, and sheer human ingenuity combine to create a distinct and powerful style in art, architecture, and even the intimate details of daily life like fashion and furniture.
From the spiritual fortress and monumental ambition of Cluny III to the narrative power and social function of the Bayeux Tapestry and the surprising details of everyday furniture like the Stanley bed, this deep dive reveals an era rich with human endeavor, profound belief, and remarkable innovation.
Yeah, it really does.
It was a period of intense rebuilding, intellectual rediscovery, and artistic reimagining that truly laid the foundations for the Europe we know today.
The Romanesque period truly gave us fortresses of the spirit, expressing a profound sense of groundedness and immense solidity in its architecture, sometimes even a certain solemnity.
That sense of weight, of permanence.
Yet simultaneously, it gave robust birth to the light of renewed learning, incredibly intricate artistry, and structural breakthroughs like the ribbed vault that laid the very groundwork for the soaring, light-filled heights of the Gothic era that followed.
Setting the stage for what came next.
Consider how such a visually imposing and seemingly heavy style could, through its very permanence and solidity, become a beacon of hope, knowledge, and stability in a turbulent world. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other dark ages or seemingly difficult periods in history might we need to re-examine more closely for their hidden innovations and unexpected brilliance?